he said, well, there's a whole big machlokas on this. And I said, I must have missed the memo. So he said, so after Shabbos, I said, please educate me, because I always took it as given from Rav Moshe's tshuva, which were one of the first tshuvas I learned from Rav Moshe, because it's simple, it's straightforward. You don't have to be that knowledgeable to just go through it. We'll go through it this evening. Can't brush your teeth on Shabbos, period. They were poskim when I was a bacher who said that maybe the brush that Rav Moshe talks about, where he says you're not allowed to use a wet brush because of schita. See, back in Rav Moshe's time, in the 40s and the 50s, they used bristle brushes. And today we use, like natural bristle, like hair. And today we use nylon, and nylon is non-absorbent. So just like you can use, the nylon, what are they called? The scrubbers, whatever they call them. You can use those on Shabbos because you're not, what? Because you're not squeezing, because they're non-absorbent. So a lot of poskim said that maybe Rav Moshe was not dealing with nylon bristles, and therefore you could use a wet toothbrush. But there's no question, toothpaste, so like the whole issue, the whole raid in our times was, there was a thing called pearl drops when I was a kid, and people were discussing, is pearl drop sufficiently liquid that you can use that as toothpaste on Shabbos? And then there's the Teodent, in Israel, that people would use, which, is nasty stuff, but, it gets the job done. Put a few drops on your toothbrush, and that helps brush your teeth. So right after Shabbos, he sends me this 19-page PDF article from Rabbi Aryeh Leibowitz, who's a really very, very dynamic, up-and-coming Rav in the 5 towns, Aram at Yeshiva University. And he's got this whole presentation about the different opinions about using toothpaste on Shabbos. So I'm fascinated. And I told him, so he had some mitigating circumstances, this very young and informed young man, where he felt that if he didn't, he had a history of tooth decay. I said, listen, based on what we're going to look at tonight, if you feel that this may pose a health threat for you to preserving your teeth, and if you want to rely on the heterim that we're going to see tonight, you have a right to do so. So that's why I felt like a bit of a dinosaur. Okay, so I wanted to go through therapy with you before we start the shiur. I got that off my chest. The issue with using toothpaste, as we had always thought, what's the problem with using toothpaste on Shabbos? Can anyone tell me? Mimareach is the correct conjugation. Miruach or mimareach. Mimareach is smearing. So that actually is a tolda. It's a offshoot of one of the 39 malachos. What's one of the 39 malachos? It's mochek, not to erase letters, but to smoothen a surface, to make it flat and to make it smooth so that you can work with that surface. That's one of the 39 malachos. And therefore, as we'll see, taking a soft substance and smearing it is also part of one of those 39 malachos, and it's called mimareach. And anything that's semi-hard, that can be smoothed out like a cream or anything that you smear, is going to present that kind of problem. So let's just go through the sources very quickly as to the source of this Isser of mimareach. We'll see some examples in the Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll get into the whole issue first with Rav Moshe, and then we'll take a look at Rav Ovadia, who has a completely different approach than Rav Moshe, and then we'll take a look at the Tzitz Eliezer, who sort of goes a little bit more on the side of Rav Moshe, and then finally we'll take a look at the Nefesh Harav, Rav Schachter quoting Rav Soloveitchik, who actually takes to me, which was a big chiddush for me, but maybe not for some of you. Okay, so the Rambam, in citing one of the 39 malachos, is mochek. V'chein hamochek min haor kedei la'asot kamei chayav. If a person smooths out hide in order to make an amulet, he's liable for a malacha on Shabbos. Ve'ezahu mochek zeh ha'ma'avir se'ar o hatzemer me'al ha'or achar mitah ad shiachlik pnei ha'or. What is the definition of mochek? It's smoothing out by removing the hair or the wool and making a surface smooth without bumps and without any kinds of impediments after the animal's already dead, because if before it's dead, it's not the malach of mochik, it may be something else, until you smoothen out the skin. The Mishnah in Maseches Shabbos extends that to a specific case of mimareach. And mimareach is a tolda of mimachek, of smoothening out. The Mishnah over here in Maseches Shabbos is dealing with, in the 22nd chapter, is dealing with the issue of creating a spigot for a barrel, or a barrel that has a hole in it and you want to close the hole because you've already gotten out its contents and you want to preserve the remainder of, let's say, the wine or the oil that's in the barrel. It says in the Mishnah, "V'lo yikavena mitzida," you're not allowed to make a new hole on the side of a barrel to create a spigot. Vim haita nekuva, and if the barrel already had a hole on its side, lo yitena leha sha'ava mipnei shehu mimareach. You're not allowed to place wax as a seal on the hole because that's an act of smearing. And as Rashi says, v'yeshkan mishum mimachek, which is the av melacha. Okay, and the Mishnah concludes by saying that once there was such a situation where someone had placed wax as a sealant on a barrel, soft wax, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I think that person may have to bring a korban chatas when the temple is rebuilt. Okay, some examples from the Shulchan Aruch. One is from Siman Shin Yud Daled. Also litain sha'ava o shemen av b'nekev hachavit l'satmo b'mpnei shehu mimareach. So the first one is based on the Mishnah that we just saw, that you cannot place wax or thick olive oil, like what would you say, hydrogenated olive oil. That's what they do with the the prefab menorahs. Menorahs, they hydrogenate the olive oil so that it's hard. So you can't do that, to use that kind of item, because you're smearing. And he says, Perish ha'aruch, sicha, meshicha, ticha, mericha, shi'a, inyan echad hu. Shulchan Aruch says, all of these actions, whether it's smearing a salve on yourself, anointing yourself with an oil, smearing, all these are all different terms. And shi'a is also to flatten out something. They all are the same thing. Aval b'sha'ar devarim deletva mishum miruach hol ve'ein hayayin yotzei mutar. But if you can find something else that does not smear, let's say putting a cork in or something like that, so then that would be permissible. The Shulchan Aruch says, another example of mimareach is in Siman Shin Tez Zayin Sif Yud Aleph. Lo yeshav sheif biraglav rok al gabe karka. Person is not allowed to, because so you've got a dirt floor, yes, and someone has during davening said shehem nishtachavim lahevel varik pitu, right? They used to have spittoons in the synagogue, right? What if a guy didn't have good aim? Okay, so he missed the spittoon, and you've got this big loogie right next to you in shul. So on Shabbos, you're not permitted. Well, this exactly. It's what we're talking about, right? So you're not allowed to step on it and smear the spittle into the ground with your foot, mishum mashve gumos, because you're flattening the ground by trying to smear the saliva or the mucus into the ground. Okay? Avol mutar ledorso lefi tumo. But what you are allowed to do is you can casually step on it, so that you sort of help it get absorbed into the soil. She'eno mitkaven lemareach ulahashvot gumot, because in that situation where you're just stepping on it without moving your foot around on the loogie to get it in there, but you're just stepping on it, and hopefully with enough foot traffic it'll eventually get flattened, that you are allowed to do, because your intention is not to smoothen the ground, which is part of. To be mashve gumos, it seems, is a separate malacha having to do with either a type of binyan, type of bona on Shabbos, But as long as your intention is not to smoothen out the surface of the saliva, then you're okay. He says, since your intention is not to smear the saliva, but rather it is to get rid of it so that it'll absorb into the ground, even though invariably by your moving it with your foot, it's flattening it, you are smearing it in a way, but nonetheless it is permitted because you are disgusted by it. Now, those words mishum mi'isuta, because it's unseemly, need to be unpacked a little bit. What exactly does that mean, mishum mi'isuta? Because of disgust. Is that like a special heter because it's a davar ma'us that will allow you to do something that would normally be forbidden? That's one way of understanding. But as we'll see, that's actually not the way Rav Ovadia understands it. He understands that it means is that your objective is not to smear the mucus. Your objective is to get it in the ground because it grosses you out. And as a result, since it's not your kavanah to smear, but rather your kavanah to make it disappear as much as possible, it is permitted. Next, megala kitzat ritiya mikaneach pi hamaka. You're allowed to open up a bandage on Shabbos to clean a wound. B'chozer umegala kitzata shniya umekancha. Notice you can't take off the bandage completely and then reaffix it, but you can take off a portion of the bandage, clean that side, then put the bandage back on, open up the other side and clean it. But the bandage itself, you're not supposed to clean because you may invariably try to smoothen the surface of the bandage, and therefore that would not be okay. And as the Ateres Savi, umechale gumos hanaasos beritia, you're actually smoothing out any kind of bumps or holes that may be in the bandage, and that's a form of mimareach. Okay, now here we get to the famous tshuva of Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe says, lenakot, it's one of the early tshuvas, lenakot shinayim b'shabbat v'yom tov. Uvedavar lenakot shinayim b'shabbos v'yom tov im toothpaste. Got that? Toothpaste. Yeah. That would be with a tough. This is with a test. Yeah, okay. In other words, mishchad shinayim. Pashut sha'asur shehu mimachek. It is obvious that it is asur because you're doing an act of mimachek. You're smoothing out the toothpaste. Okay. The uvelo toothpaste, the brush, right? Hamiyuchad lazeh mutar. But if you want to just brush your teeth without toothpaste using a brush that is specifically for your teeth, that is permitted. Kimo rechitzat sha'ar ever echad aval yishtof rak bitzonein. Just like you're allowed to wash individual parts of your body on Shabbos as long as you use cold water, the same is true with your teeth. You can wash your teeth or clean your teeth. Ve'et habrash tov shelo lelachleach b'mayim kodem hanikoi mechashash schita b'sa'ar. But it is preferable not to wet the toothbrush before you put it in your mouth. In other words, I guess presumably you can gargle a little bit in your mouth so that your mouth is wet, and then you put the dry toothbrush in your mouth. And invariably the toothbrush will get wet, but you shouldn't wetten it before putting it in your mouth, because then you might be tempted to, spritz it out, to get off some of the liquid. And that might be a problem of sochet, schita, of squeezing. Ve'achar hanikoi lo yirchatz et habrush, af shelo b'shivshuv she'ein sham schita. He says, and then after you finish brushing your teeth, you should not wash the brush, even if you don't move the bristles to squeeze out the excess water. Because he says it's an act of hachana, because by washing or rinsing off the toothbrush, you're actually preparing it for tomorrow's use, assuming that that's the only time you're going to brush your teeth. Well, maybe Rav Moshe only brushed his teeth once a day. I don't know. I didn't ask him his hygienic habits. What? It's a valid point, but Rav Moshe apparently wasn't concerned about that. So I don't believe he addresses this, certainly not in this tshuva, but there are other poskim who address if there is a psik resha, okay? Whereas let's say a person has gingivitis, and every time he brushes his teeth, right, Harold? Right? And every time he brushes his teeth, he draws blood. That creates a separate problem of, dam maka. You're not allowed to cause an injury on Shabbos, right? But it has to be a psik resha. I would say that if a person has bloody gums every time he brushes, he has bigger problems than being over on dam maka. This is but what are the risks of gingivitis if not attended to, Harold? Heart disease potentially also, right? Okay. Okay, so there are a lot of things that a person should address if it is a psik resha that every time you brush, either you're not brushing correctly, you're probably brushing with too hard or a bristle, or applying too much pressure, or you have gingivitis, in which case you need really to seek out the aid of a dentist. Yeah, anything that you know is going to draw blood as a psik resha, you're not allowed to do. Yeah. Correct. Correct. Derech achila, there's no issur of mimareach. That is correct. That seems to be the psak. I think the poskim discussed that elsewhere, but that's 100% correct, Dave. Okay. Okay, saved. The peanut butter eaters are saved. Okay. So Rav Ovadia has a tshuva about this. Nishalti mutar lishtamesh b'Shabbat b'mishchad shinayim al yidei shivshuf b'mavreshet. I was asked if it is permitted to use toothpaste applied on a toothbrush on Shabbos, u'v'yichud la'adam haragil bazeh, and this is especially relevant for someone who brushes their teeth daily. Sheyesh lo tsa'ar b'himana'o militzachtzech shinav b'mishchad shimayim kema'asehu b'chol. And listen to the way he phrases the shaila. This is especially painful or unpleasant for someone who brushes their teeth daily. It becomes very difficult for them. And there's one of those challenges on Shabbos that if we can obviate, we would try to do. Why should my Shabbos observance be mitigated in any way, or my oneg Shabbos be mitigated because I feel like I have dirty teeth? Shabbos is supposed to be a time of oneg. And if therefore a person is a mafunuk and they brush their teeth every single night and every single morning, and on Shabbos they can't, they feel a little bit yucky on Shabbos. And Adarabah, you're supposed to feel exalted on Shabbos. You're supposed to feel a sense of oneg, of pleasance, and things like that. So that's really the basis of where this is coming from. And as you'll see, Rav Ovadia really does search for a leniency, and he does find one. So it's a very long tshuva. We're only pulling out a tamtzit. He says, Reshit kol yesh leva'er im yesh bazeh mishum isr mimareach shuhu tolda de mimacheh. The first thing we have to clarify, is there an isr of mimareach, of smearing on Shabbos, a semi-hard substance, because that's an offshoot of mimachek. Uchimavur b'Shabbos sha'mimareach sha'ava saviv hanekev shebedofnei akli lesotmo chayav chatat. That if a person smears soft wax to plug up a hole on Shabbos, he's committed a malacha de oraisa. Uvegemara, mishcha rav asar ushmuel shari. That when it comes to mishcha, when it comes to using, let's say, solidified olive oil, Rav says even that you cannot use, and Shmuel says you could use that. Now, manda asar gazrina mishum sha'ava, manda shari lo gazrina. Pirush Rashi mishcha shemen av. Rashi says that mishcha is somewhat of a viscous oil. It's not as thick and malleable as wax, but there's a machlokes as to whether that falls under the category of mimareach. It may not be a malacha de oraisa of mimareach because it's too liquidy, but still there might be reason to say that it's asr. And he says the Rif and the Rush, Paskin like Rav, that it's aser, v'chein pasak harambam, shein sot min etanekav afilu b'shuman, gezera mishum sha'ava. That even if you find like a much softer, like more liquidy kind of fat to stop up the hole on Shabbos, that's still not okay. And I guess what we're talking about is you find a cork, but the cork does not create an airtight seal. So you want to put, let's say, like a liquid that's that is water resistant, like an oil. You want to put like a grease around it. What? Well, almost, but it's not as thick as like a caulk. It's more liquidy, but it creates an air seal or a water seal. Even that you shouldn't do, even though it's more liquidy than solid. And the Beis Yosef explains that really midioraisa, there's nothing wrong with using a sort of a viscous oil. But since you may come to confuse that with real wax, which is much more solidified, where miruach is much more of an issue of flattening it out, and therefore it's aser. And therefore, even if you're going to argue that toothpaste is not as hard as, let's say, wax, which is the classic case of mimareach, because toothpaste is like, it's much more liquidy than wax, but at least midirabanan, there should be an isser of flattening toothpaste once you apply it to your teeth. You're smearing something, a viscous kind of gel or paste, that should be at least asr midirabanan. Rav Ovadia then continues, we're skipping a lot. He says, Ulam nirali, and he says a huge chiddush. The lo shayach mimareach b'chi hagavna, ele imkein rotze b'kiyumo shel hadavar shemit mareach. This is the yesod of Rav Ovadia, that you're only doing the isser of mimareach, of smearing, if your desire is to maintain the item that is being smeared, the substance that is being smeared. Like when you smear wax, or you flatten the either a salve or a bandage itself that is a dressing for a wound, and you flatten it out. So that's something that you want. You want that flattening to last. But when you brush your teeth, you're not interested in the toothpaste being smeared permanently to sort of maintain the toothpaste, the smeared toothpaste. You just want to clean your teeth. So he says, what do you do immediately after you brush your teeth? You're not there to preserve the smeared toothpaste. You rinse your mouth out, you spit out the toothpaste, and then you get rid of it. And so Rav Ovadia's chiddush, that's not even an isser derabanan to use toothpaste on Shabbos, because there's no mimareach whatsoever, because your objective is not to preserve the smeared substance, but it's rather to clean your teeth. Okay? Everyone with me? You get that's the yesod that Rav Ovadia is working with. V'chein matzati kayotze bo, the Magen Avraham, ein mashakasav moran b'shulchan aruch, v'zel l'shona. So he quotes the Magen Avraham, who seems, he says, to say the same thing. Lo yeshav sheif biraglo rok al gabe karka mishum demashve gumot. So he goes back to that case that we saw in the Shulchan Aruch, that you're not allowed to smear the mucus that's on the floor, but you can just step on it casually. Because there your objective is not to flatten the ground or to make anything to smoothen a surface. He's just quoting the exact language of the Shulchan Aruch that we saw inside. The Katav Magen Avram, the Mashma Shal Gabe Ritzpa Shari L'Shav Shafo, the Leka Bahachich Shash Ashpuye Gumot Ledat Marana Mechaber Simin Shin Lamed Zayin Sif Beis. He says it sounds like from the Shulchan Aruch, says the Magen Avram, that if you're on a hard surface like a linoleum floor, like we're sitting on tonight, okay, or a wooden floor, like I don't know, what is this called? This laminate, right? Right. You're on laminate. You're on a laminate floor. Then you would be allowed to smear the lugi, and there's no problem. You're not worried about smoothing a surface because the surface is already smoothed. And he says, and shematir lechabed habayit kishakarka merutzaf, and a lot of poskim he brings would allow you to, the same isser of smoothing mucus is the same isser as sweeping a dirt floor on Shabbos. You're smoothing and evening the surface. But if it's a laminate floor, if it's a linoleum floor, it's a stone floor, then you are allowed to sweep and you're allowed to step on the lugi and smear it all around. He says, "V'cheinu b'Yerushalmi v'tzarachim delitzer mishum miruach atzmo." Why shouldn't you aser it because you're smearing out the mucus? V'yesh lomar demimareach lo shayach ela kishekavanato sheitmarech davar al gabei chavero aval hacha rotzeh sheyivla bekarka ad kan l'sham. So the Magen Avram says the reason is because your objective is for the mucus to be absorbed in the ground. You're not interested in preserving flattened mucus, smeared mucus. Your objective is to get rid of the mucus so that it'll absorb or maybe dissolve or evaporate by smearing it and distributing it more in the ground. Yeah.
What you're smoothing with.
Correct. That's right. That's correct. But there's a miruach of the toothpaste. You're smearing the toothpaste. That's the isser. So mochek is there's two prohibitions: mimachek and mimareach. Mimachek is the av melacha. Mimareach is the tolda. Mimachek is to smoothen a hard surface. If it has, let's say, bumps or it has hair, and you smoothen it out. Mimareach is to smear a semi-hard substance. Okay. Yeah. Why don't you just get a paper towel in 1842 and just clean it up that way, right? Because life was different in 1842 or 1767 or whenever this is, whenever the poskim are discussing these issues. Uvazehu, am I answering your question? Okay. No, so Meyer, so the point I'm making is that hygienic conventions were quite different, even already just a century ago. Yeah, people, they had spittoons in the synagogue. And you know what the shamas's biggest job was? Clean out the spittoons. That's why no one wanted the job. Okay, so it's a different world today. All right, thank God. So mash v'gumos is because you want the substance that's being flattened. You want that substance. You want that surface to be flattened, and you want to preserve that flattened surface. So Rav Ovadia is saying there are two things that are being smeared when you smear a lugi into the ground. Number one, you're smoothening the karka. And even though that's not your kavana, but if it's a psik reisha, it's going to be aser. And number two, you're mimareach, the mucus. So, but he says, my diuk is, which the Magen Avram makes, is that if it's on a hard floor, which is not, there's no problem of mash v'gumos, so then you're allowed to smear the mucus and you don't have to worry about mimareach. So that's his question. He says, why should that be? The answer is because you don't want to preserve the item that you're smearing. You want to dispose of it, and you're smearing it as a method of disposal. And the same thing is true with toothpaste. That's the analogy that he's creating. Yeah. Well, so that's the question. Can you make that argument? The question really is there some kind of surface remnant of cream on the skin when in other words, you're right. If you could make the argument that I have a certain kind of salve that has medicine in it, and the objective is not to leave any surface on the skin, but rather because I need it to absorb into the skin, because the medicine has to go subdermal, right? So then the same argument could be made 100%. But usually, like when we use Neosporin or things like that, our objective is to preserve a layer of ointment above the skin. And that's the problem of where you get into mimareach. No, so that's the what's it called? The Vaseline or whatever you call it today. Yeah, so that would be the same issue as Neosporin, right? It's the same thing. You want there to be a layer above the skin to act as a protectant, a protection for the broken skin or the diaper rash, right? I think both ointment and cream depends on the objective, I think. Anyway, Ulafiza. So he says, according to this, Ein ze inyan lahashat haor bein ha'amudim v'ze barur. So he said, I'm not sure what he's referring to. I'm sorry that I forgot what he was referring to in this line. Ume'ata nira shedivrei hamagin Avram ve'achronim she'imo shayachim gam lenidon didan dahamimareach mishchat shinayim ein kavanato ela lenakot hashinayim uletzach tzechan v'chei gavna lo chashiv mirach klal umishra shari. And he says, based on that, Rav Ovadia says we should argue that using toothpaste on your toothbrush should be 100% fine because you're not interested in preserving the smeared substance. V'lichora, we'll do one more paragraph and then we'll be done with Rav Ovadia. V'lichora yesh lahayir od bazeh. He says, let's add to this. He says, uvatchila navi mashakasav harama sha'asur lirchotz biborit shekorin zayf ta'avalei noilad adkan. Now, we're not going to be focusing on the issue of molid, that you're creating something when you create a foamy substance on Shabbos. We're not going to deal with that. It seems like most of the poskim are makel. In most instances, let's say you want to wash your hands with liquid soap, and by scrubbing your hands, you create bubbles. Most of the poskim are makel because it's a davar she'eino miskabin. That's not your objective. But the Shulchan Aruch does say that you're not allowed to wash your hands with soap because you're doing an act of molid where you're extracting some sort of liquid off of a bar of soap. The lichora kasha, the amai hutzra charama litam noilad, velo asar mitam isr mimareach toldadim mimachek. Why didn't the Ramah say that there's a bigger problem of using bar soap on Shabbos? Because of the problem of mimareach. You're smearing a substance, it doesn't get to move all over your skin. You're smearing soap on your skin. Uchemos sheraiti kain lamaisa lahamaisa rokeach shekasav shaharochetz biborit b'shabbat arehu mimareach umimachek behechrech. He says, and this sefer maaseh rokeach says taka that's part of the prohibition of using bar soap on Shabbos. And I hope it's clear that there are a number of reasons to asr using bar soap on Shabbos. V'hu av melachu psikreisha denichle, and something that you want. V'chemoch v'chein kasvu hapoiskim. V'yoter yesh lahayer al das hamagen Avram shekasav sheyesh matirin bazeh. He says, and especially that the Magen Avram says that there are some people who are lenient with bar soap. The dafka bibarad v'shelek shomdim l'mashkim avinolad masha'ein kain biboris. He says there's only an isser of converting a solid into a liquid when it comes to, let's say, ice or melting snow with your hands, where there's an isser derabanan because of molid. He says, but with soap, where you're not, it's not meant to be melted. In other words, it's not waiting to be melted. Therefore, there's no isser derabanan. Quotes the Shultei Giborim. V'lo heir klal midin mimareach. And he doesn't say that there's a problem of mimareach. אלא כשצריך לאותו דבר שמחליקו וממחקו כגון שאבש על פי הנקב וכיוצא בו. This only supports my contention that you're not interested in preserving a smeared layer of soap on your skin after you wash your hands or your arms or your legs with the soap. So even though you're smearing soap on your body, maybe that's not bichlal an iser of mimareach. You're only using it to wash your hands, and then you're going to rinse it off. The fact that the soap starts to get smeared and you lose some of the bulk of the soap every time you wash your hands, that's not your objective. And finally, after skipping like a huge amount of this tshuva, he says, even though we're machmir not to allow bar soap on Shabbos, but based on everything that we've explained, b'mishchat shinayim nami yesh lahakel. You can be lenient, says Rav Ovadia, that's its bottom line. We permit you to use toothpaste on Shabbos. Okay. Next tshuva from the, again, condensing a much longer tshuva from Rav Waldenberg that Tzitz Eliezer. Tshuva lechacham echad. One is about whether you can ride a bike on Shabbos. I think we did that in our Smichas Chaver program. Maybe that's another shiur, worthwhile having a shiur about riding bikes on Shabbos. Okay. Scooters, bikes, right? The difference between scooters and bikes, okay? Bait, but the second tshuva that Rav Waldenberg has over here is sicha b'mishcha v'nikui shinayim b'Shabbos b'mishchat shinayim. Both using ointment on your skin and using toothpaste to brush your teeth. So we're not getting into the whole thing. We're coming into, he says, Ela dilafi hamagin Avram hanal, yesh aval lichor lilmod heter l'shivshuf hashinaim b'mishcha biyot de'en kavanato she'itmarech al gabe hashinaim. He quotes the same Magen Avram that we saw in Rav Ovadia. And he says, on that basis, we should argue using that Magen Avram that since you don't want the smoothed substance to remain, you want to get rid of it, in the case of the toothpaste, so then it should be okay. Kavanato ha'ikarit bazerak sheyitnaku hashinaim v'ratzon sheyivla v'yitmaseis miyad. You just want the teeth to be cleaned, and you want to get rid of the toothpaste immediately. Aval be'emet ze eino, de'eino domeh lehahi derok. And he says, whereas Rav Ovadia felt that this was completely analogous to smearing the lugi on the ground, Rav Waldenberg says it's not analogous. The toothpaste case is not analogous to smoothing the lugi on a hard floor. He says, "De b'sham kol shif shufo laharok rak l'shem hamatara sheyivla b'karka ubiladeze ein lo kol kavanat to'alit bazeh." Listen to the argument that Rav Waldenberg makes. He says, in the case of the lugi that's on the ground, you want to get rid of the lugi. That's your whole objective in smearing it. You want to get rid of it. He says, and that's the reason why the Magen Avram would hold that it's permissible. But here, the reason you're smearing the toothpaste is not because you want to get rid of toothpaste. The reason you're smearing toothpaste is in order to get some utility out of a smeared substance, which is the cleaning of your teeth. You understand? Okay? And on that basis, in other words, we're really like splitting hairs. In other words, Rav Ovadia says, anytime you don't want to keep the smeared substance, you want to get rid of it, it's fine. And therefore, there's no chiluk between smearing a logi to get rid of it and smearing toothpaste in order to clean your teeth. In both cases, you want to get rid of the smeared substance as soon as you're finished your activity. But Rav Waldenberg says, no, there is a difference. When you're smearing the lugi, you want to get, your whole action is to get rid of the smeared substance. When you're brushing your teeth, your action is to clean your teeth. You're getting utility out of the smearing action, which is more than just trying to dispose of the smeared item. He says, שיש לו תועלית מוקדמת שתעלה שכבת המשחה על השיניים ותישאר ככה לרגעי קט. In other words, you want the smeared substance to do something on your teeth that is productive, even though it's only temporary. ורק לאחר מכאן הוא דרצונו שתסמסמס ותיבלע. And then only afterwards you want the toothpaste to wash away and to dissolve, etc. ואם כן, יש לומר דבחיי גבנה שפר הוא דאוסר, דהרי אין שיעור למירוח, לא בכמותו ולא באיכות השהייתו, ובכל שהוא חייב. And therefore, Rav Waldenberg's argument is, even though you're going to be getting rid of the toothpaste, but the fact that you want it to remain on your teeth and clean your teeth, even for just a few minutes, is problematic. And therefore, he argues that brushing teeth on Shabbos with toothpaste is going to be usher. Okay, so far so good. You with me there? Okay. So I'm going to skip the next paragraph because I see some people are losing interest. So let me just. Not necessarily. We're not finished with the shiur yet. You'll let me know what you think when we get to our final source. So source Yud Daled Sof Davar Hakol Nishma, that he ends off the tshuva after a lot of discussion. Da'ad kama shenirtze lahakel be'inyan hamishchot urak bazeh lahotzi ze mi'isur deoraisa. He says that the paragraph that we're skipping has to do with using salve and ointments on Shabbos. He says, I can't permit it because even if you're going to argue that there's not an Isser deoraisa, aval Isser derabanan bevadai yeshno. There still is an Isser derabanan. V'lachein ein kol makom lahakel besichat tinokot b'mishchat hazalbe b'Shabbos. What is zalbe? Salve. Very good. Okay, so therefore there's no heter to use diaper rash ointment on babies on Shabbos, certainly not in the normative way. Obviously, there are heterim if you use a shinoi and the baby has a din of a choila and so forth and so on. But to actually smear it in the normative fashion, there's no heter. Udelo kahamate levi v'gam l'rabot she'en lahatir nikui hashinayim b'shabbat b'mishchat shinayim. And therefore concludes Rav Waldenberg, like Rav Moshe, that we cannot allow you to use toothpaste on Shabbos. So what is it now? 2 against 1s. Usser, Rav Moshe, Rav Waldenberg, Mutter, Rav Ovadia. Let's even the score, shall we? Okay. In order for us to be able to understand the next tshuva, we have to take a quick look at a Gemara, which says, Bakol Chafin, that on Shabbos you're allowed to polish silver utensils with any kind of substance you like, chutz miklei kesef begartekon, except you're just not allowed to polish silver with something called gartekon. And Rashi tells us that it's kamin afar shegadil bechavuyot shel yayin, that it is a type of powder that you can find on the barrels of wine, inside the barrels of wine. What is that we call that? That's potassium bitartrate, or also known as cream of tartar. And we've had a shiur about this when we talked about sherry casks and the heter of storing scotch in sherry casks, the kashrus of it. If you recall, we had a shiur about that sometime before COVID back in the old days. But we're not going to get into kashrus issues now, whether cream of tartar that comes from non-kosher wine is kosher, but because that's not what the Gemara is talking about. But it says you're not allowed to use this kind of powder to polish silver. And Rashi explains, because hu ikar tikun klei kesef v'gorer oto sha'kesef rach v'hu memachek shehu av melacha, because you're actually smoothening the silver surface, because apparently this powder has such an abrasive quality on silver that it actually removes some of the actual surface of the silver. It smoothens out any kinds of cracks and indentations when you apply it properly. And therefore, you're doing a malacha of memachek. But if you use a less abrasive kind of cloth or detergent to clean kalim, that you're allowed to do on Shabbos, and you don't have to worry about memachek because the integrity of the utensil remains intact. In other words, you're not removing or smoothening the actual surface. You're just cleaning it without altering the surface in any way. The Shulchan Aruch codifies this and says, "Mutar l'shavshef hakelim b'chol davar chutz miklei kesef begartiken shehu shmarei yayin kishenit yabshu v'nitkashu mipnei shu memachek l'klei kesef shu rach." It's exactly what we learned in the Gemara. And the Mishnah Berurah says that when we say that you're allowed to use any substance to clean metal utensils, with the exception of cream of tartar on silver, he says, "Va'afilu beneter v'chol kishiyichid lehem makom miba'od yom she'enu muktzah." You're even allowed to use these harsh detergents like sand and neter, which is, how do we translate neter? What is a kind of it's a kind of lime, I think, that is used as a detergent. It's a caustic detergent, but you're allowed to use it as long as you prepared it from the day before, so you avoid the problem of muktzah. The afal pisha efshar de garir v'havi memachek mikol makam havi davar she'en miskavein v'shari volgartikan havi psikresha. He says, even though it's possible that through some level of abrasion you may end up smoothing the surface and actually altering the surface, but it's not a psikresha, and that's not your primary intention, and therefore it's permitted. But if you use this other cream of tartar powder, that's a psik ratio that it will definitely alter the surface of the silver. Yes, Marvin. Lie. Thank you. Thank you very much. I knew it was something that was caustic and I just forgot the name. Thank you. Alkali. Okay. But it has like a strong chemical action on the surface. So this is from the Sefer Nefesh Harav. It was written by Rav Hershel Schachter, citing the Piskei Halacha of his Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik. How many of you have ever seen this tshuva before? Did you ever see this tshuva on toothpaste before? Just curious. Have you seen it? What? Yeah. Okay. Rabbeinu Haya, you've seen it? You've seen it, Gerard. Okay. Rabbeinu Haya Savur shenutar lihishtamesh b'michat shinayim b'Shabbat. He says, our Rebbe, Rav Soloveitchik, was of the opinion that you're allowed to use toothpaste on Shabbos. Da'ein bazeh mishum memachek. Al pi habraita b'Shabbat b'chol chafinet hakelim chutz miklei kesef begartikon. He says, based on that Gemara that we just saw, that you're allowed to use even caustic detergents to clean the surface, as long as it's not a psik resha that you're going to be removing some of the surface. Now, does toothpaste remove the enamel on your teeth? Okay, the expert has spoken. Dr. Savovich has informed us that using toothpaste responsibly will not remove anything off the surface of your teeth. The leka ika mimachek b'mesirat halichluch hamudbak l'shinayim. He says you're never doing an act of mimachek if you're just using a cleanser to remove the dirt off of your teeth. Just like you're not doing an act of mimareach to the kli by smoothing it if you're using a detergent that will not remove anything off of its surface. And he says he can't understand the opinion of those say it's usr. So Rav Soloveitchik is not looking at the toothpaste, he's looking at the teeth. Just like laser you had raised before, and I think maybe Howard or somebody else or Meyer raised before, that there's two issues. There's the ground that you have the lugi resting on, where the rabbis were concerned of mashve gumos, you're smoothing the surface and flattening it out. And then there's the mamareach concern of the mucus itself. So as long as the surface, like the ground, or in this case, the teeth, you're not removing anything or altering the surface of the teeth at all, just like you're not altering the surface of a metal utensil when you use detergent, there's therefore no mimareach. There's also no mimareach by using toothpaste on the teeth. He doesn't address the issue of the smearing of the toothpaste, though. He's only addressing the issue that you're not altering in any way the surface of the teeth. Okay, let's just get through the tshuva. The Omar, so he said, the Rav said, I don't understand those people who would say it's usr. The efshar lomar shebechol pam shemitzachzeach et hashinayim shu gorer bazeh chelek meha inamel shalahem. He says it's impossible to suggest that every time you brush your teeth, you're lifting off a small amount of enamel from the teeth. Because if you brush your teeth every day like a good boy should, then you would expect that after a few years, you would have no teeth left or have very, very thin teeth without very much of thickness left. Because every time, if you're brushing your teeth, you're removing or altering the surface of the teeth. That's just not the case. ופתח אחד מן התלמידים ואמר, שדת המחמירים בזה הוא מטעם ממרח תולדה דממחק ולא משום ממחק ממש. So he said that the concern is the smearing of the toothpaste, said one of the students. It's not the concern that you're removing the enamel. וכשמו רבנו קיין עדיין טען ואמר, שלא שייך לאסור מטעם ממרח, אלא במקום שהוסיף שטח חלק חדש על גבי משהו. So Rav Soloveitchik's argument was that there's only a problem of smearing the toothpaste when you add some kind of substantive substance to a surface that you'd like to remain there. אבל כאן בתחילה אין המשחה ניתנת על גבי השיניים בצורה של שטח חלק. He says, but you're not smoothing out toothpaste so that you can create a smooth surface on your teeth. ואחר הצחצוח כמה פעמים שכבר נתמרחה המשחה היטב על גבי השיניים באופן שכזה שנמצאת מריחה בשווה על גבי כולם. הלא איננו של קיים הכלל וכלל. Your objective is not to create a smooth film of substance over your teeth. Your objective is to distribute the toothpaste all over your teeth. And by that time that you've distributed the toothpaste all over your teeth, it's not a smeared substance anymore. It's almost like it's just mixed with your saliva and with the water that's in your mouth, and it's not a smeared substance by that time anyway. So Rav Soloveitchik said, I don't understand why there would be a problem of mimareach, of smearing in that case. All you have is a very, very fine film of liquefied toothpaste, and that's not called mimareach. And then certainly afterwards, like Rav Ovadia had argued, you dispose of that substance. So at no point in time was there ever an objective for you to keep a substantive film of toothpaste on your teeth. By the time you distributed it all over your teeth, it was no longer a smeared substance, it was a liquefied substance, and by that time, there's no problem of mimareach. He says, what about the commercials? The ads in the times of Rav Soloveitchik were that you should use our toothpaste, our Pepsodent, or our, was that the Kunz of Pearl Drops? It leaves a shine, it leaves like a veneer on your teeth. If you use it every day, it'll leave like a nice veneer, like that will stay with you the whole day long, which is bogus, I think, anyway. It's absolute bogus. But he says, despite the fact that that's part of the advertising, he says, Reishit kol mistama imenu emes. So first of all, he says, it's not even true. It's not true. Come on. Who are you kidding? And he says, Vafilo naniach shekenhu be'emet, and even if we'll submit that there is truth to it, that there is some kind of very, very thin veneer of the toothpaste that does remain on your teeth, mikol makom davar shehu bilti nir'eh ein bo mishum melacha. Something that's totally invisible cannot possibly make you liable for doing a malach. So, in the final analysis, it's 2 against 2. You have, I'm sure there's more poskim that discuss this. That's for our hit parade tonight. You have Rav Moshe and you have Rav Waldenberg are machmir, to not permit toothpaste. You have Rav Ovadia and Rav Soloveitchik who are makel, and Rav Schachter, of course, who's now sort of the mamali makom kavyachol of Rav Soloveitchik as far as piskei halacha. He also is makel. He's citing his Rebbe, and therefore a person who's coming to this anew would have on what to be, certainly has every right to be makel if they want to be makel. And so when I went through Rabbi Leibowitz's whole essay, and I saw his Makoros, and I looked them up. I said to the fellow, I said, you do have a right to be lenient in this area. I personally grew up in a generation where no one was makel. How many of you were told when you were a kid you should not use toothpaste on Shabbos? I think just about all of us in this room were of a certain generation. We were told, don't use toothpaste on Shabbos. But it seems that, today is a new day has dawned. And perhaps maybe in today's generation you can be. Yes, Laser. Yes. Yeah, Rav Ovadia had pointed out that generally speaking, the gel and the paste that we use today is more liquidy than the Isser D'Oraisa of Mimarech, but still at least there's an Isser D'Rabanan. But you're bleaching. Maybe there's a problem of libun, of bleaching on Shabbos. That's an interesting point. I didn't take that into consideration. But I would argue that even there, the amount of whitening that takes place with one brush of teeth is negligible. It has a cumulative effect. So I would argue that in and of itself is not an issue. Even with just one brush? Laser. Uh-huh. That it's actually an obligation to brush your teeth with toothpaste. It makes the case that it is a thing that it is medically necessary. On one hand, medically, it shouldn't be doing it on Shabbos, which is one position. I don't remember the exact details. I have to forward it, but basically, forward it to the WhatsApp group. But basically, it has to be continued. It makes it strong. So it's like taking antibiotics, almost, right? Yeah. Wow. Well, I can tell you, Kanai Hara, I still have my teeth. And I've avoided brushing my teeth one day out of every 7. Actually, on average, 1 out of every 6, because I don't brush them on Yom Tov either. But maybe my teeth would be stronger if I brushed every day. I don't know. You mean on the brush? On the brush, yeah. You can use liquid. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's. Yeah. I use like the Israeli stuff. The kosher lepesach adway. Yeah.
All right. Is there any issue with the toothpaste adway?
Yeah, so they talk about that. There's no issue because it's a davar sheino miskabi. Your objective is not to create a specific shape. You just want to get it out of the tube. So yeah.
Years ago, before the current new term, like all hearing, he had a whole thing. He started an essay saying he was and his son and his friend came over to tell him from it of the logic. And the boys were going to their young upstairs. He said, you go upstairs and brush your teeth. You go upstairs and don't brush your teeth.
Very good. Okay, we'll hold it here for tonight, Rabbi Sai.